Welcome everybody, it's Salman. In this video, we are going to be explaining the blood vials. Finally, we get a proper explanation for it from the timeline we got the other day, or a couple of days already now. It is just so interesting, and I am just so confused when I see this. I kind of have an understanding of it, but at the same time while looking at this, it is so confusing. So I am really going to try to explain this to the best I can, but just keep in mind, this is going to be pretty darn confusing because we're going to be dealing with multiple Richtofens, people time traveling the same day, they're returning on the same day. It is just very confusing, so you guys are going to have to bear with me on this one because this one is so confusing, and I'm going to be reading some things from the Chronicles timeline that we just got the other day, and I'm going to have to stop and kind of explain some things in the middle because it is very confusing. And if you guys are wondering, this did happen in the 2-year gap between Origins and the Giant. It's kind of confusing, but it's pretty much what Richtofen was doing. Not all of what Richtofen was doing, there's still a lot of other things, and I plan to make a video explaining everything else he did it because I didn't want to have the blood vials included in that video because the blood vials are just way too complicated to explain, and all the other stuff that he did during his travels, so I decided to make this a separate video. So anyways, with that long intro out of the way, let's actually get into this. So let's start off with this excerpt from the Chronicles, and July 4th, 1941 in Dimension 63, of course, being Origins, Mob of the Dead, and Shadow's Vials universe, and that's just what it is for anybody who is unaware of it. And now I'm going to read most of this, but not all of it, because in some other excerpts that I'm going to read after it kind of explain it better, and then some other parts are just not relevant, so I'll just leave those ones out. What it says is, Richtofen returns to the lab under Alcatraz, where he meets Victus. Of course, in my other video, I'll explain the lab under Alcatraz, and if you guys don't know, Victus is the Tranzit crew. Arriving from the empty Earth with the Chronicles. Upon reading the Chronicles, Richtofen discovers numerous timelines documenting their fates and learns about the blood vials. He would later write on the page, "I know what I must do." ER 4741. Now I'm going to cut off right here because these next two explain exactly what he did better, because they're kind of summarizing what he does. So what it says right here is that July 11th, 1943, Dimension 63. Stepping through the rift, Richtofen secures the blood samples of Cell and Finn. June 4th, 1914, Dimension 63. Richtofen is visited by another version of himself, and when I say another version of himself is that this is the one that just recently read the Chronicles, and he went back in time and met his younger self even before Origins, and then handing him some blood vials, he explains, "You will need this blood. When the time comes, it will protect you," before stepping back through a rift. So right here, let's pause right here before we move on anymore, because this just explained how Richtofen got the blood vials before Origins, because he had these blood vials on him before Origins even happened. In the intro to Origins, we saw him with the blood vials, and now we finally know how he got them. It was one of the biggest mysteries in the storyline, and people were just so dumbfounded by it, including me, and now that we finally got an explanation for it, I'm just so happy and relieved, because this is absolutely insane, because he read the Chronicles and learned that, oh shoot, I need to have the blood vials on me, even though I've had the blood vials already on me, but I know I have to go give my past self these blood vials in order for me to ever have the blood vials. It's pretty clever, but I don't know, it's getting confusing. Now, if that wasn't confusing enough, of course it gets even more confusing. So in this next one, it says January 10th, 2036 original timeline, and of course this is after the events of everything Black Ops 2, or after Buried, and this is after Maxis did his endgame and all that good stuff, but he hasn't destroyed the entire Earth yet. So what happens is Richtofen instructs the undead Richtofen to pursue Victus and recover their blood vials, and this is actually very interesting because we saw this inside the comic book series in the second newest one, because we saw the undead Richtofen keep chasing Victus until they went inside those rooms and they took their blood and all that stuff. And what happens here, and it doesn't exactly say, but the undead Richtofen actually collects these, but it gets even more interesting. So this next one says blood acquired, Granddaughter timeline. Richtofen collects the blood samples from the undead Richtofen. Now this is so weird. So somehow the undead Richtofen got to Granddaughter, so where the house is and all that stuff, and he gave the blood vials to Richtofen, to the Origins Richtofen, and that is so weird. Like, if he went into Granddaughter and gave him the Victus blood samples, that is so weird. But then after that, and this is really weird because we're going back to July 4th, 1941 in Dimension 63. So this just happened all in the same day. It's from the view of, I guess, from the view of Richtofen, maybe. I know it actually doesn't seem like in the same day to anybody, but it's just so confusing that he returns to the exact same day from when he actually first learned about it. It is pretty interesting, but when he's there, Primis arrives to collect the Victus blood samples from Richtofen, and there's more to that, but that is kind of irrelevant from what we're talking about. So just to have this all explained to the best ability I can, is is that Richtofen's blood samples are Cell and Finn's, but the other 3 characters have the Victus blood samples, and of course it was explained inside that area because he had the undead Richtofen go and get the Victus blood samples from them, of course in the comic book series that we saw not too long ago, and when he got those, gave him the original Richtofen, and Richtofen arrived back in the same exact day when Primis arrived in that exact same day and handed himself, because Richtofen is also a part of Primis, a future version of himself, handing him those blood samples to the other Primis characters, and they got the Victus blood samples. So just to simplify this as much as possible, Richtofen went back in time and collected Finn and Cell's blood samples, went even further back in time and gave them to his younger self, and then after that he went and got in contact with the undead Richtofen, had him collect the Victus blood samples, then the undead Richtofen delivers it to the Origins Richtofen, then Primis Richtofen, which is still Origins Richtofen except with the rest of the group, gives it to Primis, which of course is also him except from the future. The only reason he's called Primis now is because he's with the other 3. So, and then of course Richtofen goes ahead and gives it to the other characters. So that is weird, and hopefully that is explained. Hopefully, that's all I could say. That's the only way I could think of explaining this, and if you guys are still confused, I do apologize. I can understand why it's so confusing because it's just really weird how this all went down, and at least we got an explanation for it, and it makes sense in some ways, and it's just really weird. I just have one problem with it, but I'll probably save that for some other time because it is just very confusing. I don't really know what to say about it, and I just don't want to leave it off with something stupid. So anyways, that's about it for this video. If you guys did enjoy the video, go ahead and thumbs up. If you guys want to stay tuned for all of Richtofen's 2-year gap travels, go ahead and subscribe because I'll have that up on my channel soon enough. But that's about it for me, and I'll catch you guys on my next video.